I want to talk about is something that's dear to us. It's game audio related. And this is something we've talked about in the past about like the sort of technologies we can expect from next generation games. And the big one, there's a lot of technologies that get thrown around, but the big ones are is using ray tracing for audio, which is not usually what people attribute ray tracing to. It's usually draw a visual that way by sending out uh, hypothetical light rays and having it bounce back, and that gives information to the game system to render things like reflections and shadows more accurately and light projection, all that stuff. And it works brilliantly for that. But the like not as often spoken about is the way ray traced audio works, and it's actually like an important advancement for this generation. So we'll talk a bit about that. They also talk about a new method that they're using to get more reactive audio. So for Forza Horizon 5 is a racing game. A lot of the effect that you get from the game, the feeling of responsiveness comes from the sort of audio feedback. And racing games forever have been plagued with this issue where you get a vacuum sound, a vacuum cleaner, and it has to do with the way that audio is captured and then played back based off of inputs from the game and conditions and whatnot. And they've seemed to address this with a new technology. So we'll talk about that as well. So let's dig into it a bit. Basically, as I said, Forza released a video and they focused the entire video on game audio. They had a bit about graphics as well, but they focused on the game audio because there's two important advancements coming to Forza Horizon that are kind of interesting to get excited about, especially if you care about audio. So they had their lead audio designer, Fraser Strachan. I'm botching his name, but he's the lead audio designer. And two of the directives that they had for this game was to really deal with the sound of engines. And not only that, they're working on the Xbox Series X, which gives them a bevy of new audio hardware to work with, which is one of the cool things about the next generation is how much hardware has been dedicated to audio rendering. So they took full advantage of this, and rightfully so. So the two advancements were ray traced audio and this thing called granular synthesis. And I'll talk about granular synthesis first. This is to address the issue with droning engine sounds that you get in most racing games. Gran Turismo 5 or any of the Gran Turismos really are like notoriously bad with this. And then games that tend to have like more, potent sounding cars, the thing that you get as a side effect is that the engine sounds aren't very responsive. So you have a trade-off. You can have really punchy sounding audio coming out of the car, but it's just not really mapped one-to-one with the way the car is driving or the way it's behaving, and you kind of get like a emulated ideal sound of a car and not audio that's based on the actual car. And games like Need for Speed do this, but at the sacrifice of not sounding like the actual cars and not being particularly responsive. Gran Turismo goes the other way and records audio car loops, but what you get is a vacuum cleaner sound. And in the same way that like the emulated or like the idealized sound that you get out as a Need for Speed is just as inaccurate as the simulated sound that you get out of a Gran Turismo. And the reason why this is when you were going for simulation, the way these audio designers work with the cars is they stick them up with a bunch of microphones and they record basically different engine revolutions at different times, and you get like a good long sample of the way the car sounds and what it sounds like when going, and then you use that loop and repeat it over time to get the sound of a car idling at 4,000 RPM, or a car redlining at whatever 10,000 RPM. But you get like a really droning and repetitive sound that doesn't actually sound anything like what a car sounds like when you're driving it. The granular synthesis that they're working with, the folks that working on Horizon 5, the method for this is actually break the audio down to smaller chunks. So you still get loops, but the loops are more granular and can progress more specifically over time. It also allows you to do things like pull in the way a whoosh sounds, or a burble or a pop, and grab those down at their own little loops and selectively add those when conditions on the controller make sense. And this allows for a more dynamic sounding car, and the result is something that sounds a lot more realistic to what was actually recorded. And so I'll play actually some of the video now so that you can actually take a listen to what it sounds like. So I think what's like super cool about this is that, and this is something we've talked about with next gen in general, is that with the power at hand on things like the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series, is that we can get closer to having actual simulations of things. So think about like wind simulation or cloud simulation or water simulations. These things are really power intensive usually and cannot be done on home consoles. And this basically this granular synthesis system basically breaks down all of the engine sounds to component parts, small loops, and have it update dynamically at 90 frames per second, to the point where you're actually just simulating the engine sounds in real time, which is just like a super cool application of this. It takes a ton of work and a ton of recording and a really organized audio design team, but the output is that they have a set of cars that actually, more than any other game before it, emulate and sound like the real thing, down to burbles and pops, and and the sound of air whooshing in through a air intake. With this system and the way that they can break down the different engine sounds, you can modulate the aspects of it, and on top of that, record, say, the way a I don't know, like a Ferrari with a new cam setup or a larger air intake, how the audio would sound with that, and you can re-emulate that with the stuff that's already recorded and get sort of different engine sounds based off of the way a car would be modified, allowing cars to actually update the way they sound based off of the type of modifications. And you can kind of check that out here. So you see it's kind of switching between different aspects, different air intake, and you can rev now in this like customization point to get the different sounds. So take a listen. So another thing that they brought up in this entire presentation was ray traced audio. And people may be asking, like, what's ray traced audio? And as I said before, ray traced video is when you can essentially trace a ray to understand how light might be passing through an environment. And some of the things that you can get from that is like how light would be imbued with properties based off of how a light bounces around a room. But we can actually apply a very similar idea with the way we do audio. And we've talked about this before, but ray traced audio allows for really accurate simulation of audio in the way it bounces around a room. So in a virtual environment, you may have, like you may be hearing in here, a closed room is going to pick up echoes. Basically, the way sound is going to project out. If it's hitting hard surface, it's going to bounce back and hit another wall and bounce back before you get back to the listener. In this case, it's my ears or the microphone that's over here. But in a game, you have a virtual listener. So this is really cool for things like, I don't know, accurately simulating an echo in a cave. If you're close to the wall and you project your voice out and it's going to bounce around the room and come back to you, it's going to sound different when you have a wall right here. You're going to get a different acoustic signal from that sound than if you were in the middle of the room and you're getting the reflections back. So this is going to be sounding heavier on the lower tones and kind of not muffled, but it's going to change the properties of the acoustics. In the middle of the room, you only can hear the brighter sounds, and it's going to sound different. You're also going to be able to, in your like mind's eye, if you closed your eyes, you would be able to hear whether or not you're close to an object by the way audio's reflecting off of it. And for a game like Horizon, Forza Horizon 5, you are in all types of environments, right? The whole thing is an open world environment where you're driving through Mexico. You go through cities, plains, canyons, whatever. And all those have like different acoustic environments. The traditional way of doing that would be to go into a place that is similar to that, stick out audio probes and capture the way audio reflects in that space. And then when you go into that with your car, you're going to take the audio that's being projected out and essentially put an EQ modifier on it that's going to change the value of the way the audio is being reflected in that space. But it's consistent no matter where you are in that space. It's being universally applied the same way to that audio. And so you get the effect of being in a canyon, but you don't get the spatial aspect of it. So where you are in the canyon is not really going to change. You're just going to get like the echoey sound. Ray trace audio allows for the accurate calculation of the way audio bounces around a room or space or a wall or whatever else and give the effect. But not only that, they were able to go through the material systems and the materials that they build in the game. So giving something a rock texture or any other type of material, grassy lands, tree, it all is going to absorb audio differently. And so they had to the materials that they had in the world, they gave an absorption coefficient, which causes it so that when a ray gets casted out, that's going to be projecting audio out and it bounces off of a tree, that audio gets absorbed differently and reflected back differently than if it were a rock wall. That's the absorption coefficient that sort of modifies that. So not are you just getting accurate reflections coming back at you based off of the way a structure of a room is, but you're also getting the absorption of audio, so it makes it sound more accurate to the type of environment you're in. So a plain where you have grassy lands and trees is going to absorb audio more efficiently than, say, a canyon wall, which is going to reflect it accurately. And so, you may be going, hey, that's really cool that we got now like more accurately modeled, basically a fancy EQ for my game audio, but it also allows for spatialized audio that works that way. So having audio reflect off the top of, like, say, a tunnel as you barrel through it, you can have audio reflecting from all directions. So if you have either like a Dolby Atmos setup where you have speakers top and bottom and around you, or a set of headphones that basically don't need to do that, you should be able to hear audio coming from above you and below you based on where audio is reflecting off of. So you get a much better sense of spatial depth just from the audio alone without even having to do anything with the graphics. And finally, the last cool part of it is rays get casted out from sources of sound emission. So when you're playing like a multiplayer game, which Forza Horizon is, you can play multiple cars in a level, and even single player with other cars on there, rays are being cast out from those sound emitters. So like a car in front of you or behind you or next to you or whatever is going to sound different because the rays get cast to the listener and will pass through objects or reflect off of objects and hit the listener differently. And it's going to give you a better sense of the position of cars near and around you because they're being accurately simulated. So overall, it's just like this super cool application of game audio, and it's really cool to see them taking the charge and actually doing next gen audio the way that everybody's been expecting it to be.